Hello everyone, my name is Nick, and today we're going to talk about 5 interesting, uncommon, out there philodendrons. I think we could all agree that aroid fever is spreading, aroid referring to any plant that falls into the Araceae family of plants, which includes genera such as Philodendron, Monstera, Epiprenum, which includes your standard golden pothos, Rhaphidophora, there's many more than that, but I would arguably say that philodendron are the most highly sought after group in the aroid family. Many of these philodendrons are gaining so much popularity on social media that they are becoming a little hard to get your hands on and sometimes go for a ridiculous price, such as the Philodendron Pink Princess, just to name an example. So I just wanted to highlight 5 out there philodendrons that I just don't hear talked about as much, that are definitely much more palatable on their price, a little bit more easier to get your hands on in my experience, and just deserve a little bit more attention. The first philodendron we're going to talk about today is this lovely Philodendron mexicanum. The name mexicanum is referring to this plant being native to Mexico, which I think is really interesting because a lot of the philodendrons on the market are native to South America, and while that's all fine and dandy, I think it's really cool to have a philodendron that's native a little bit closer to home here in the United States. So I just think that's really, really cool. This is a plant that gets really interesting leaf structure. You can see here on what's left of this mature leaf, the lovely lobes that happen on the back ends of the leaves. These other 2 leaves that I have right here are much more immature, but I'm hoping that with the new growth, as you can see, I have a new leaf going in right here, that it's a little bit more defined in its leaf structure. So that's something I'm really interested in. This is a philodendron that would vine all over the place, so you could let it go and get all wily and crazy all over the place, but if you would like to keep it a little bit more tame, you could also give it a moss pole to climb up, and I'm sure it would really appreciate it, and it would also probably cause the new growth to get larger leaves and probably some more leaf shape and structure to the leaves. This plant, I'm watering it not very often. I'm probably giving this plant water like every week, but keeping in mind it's also very close to a southern facing window, as I was assuming with the conditions that are in Mexico that this plant would probably prefer just a little bit brighter light than it gives some of my other philodendrons. I don't know if it's growing in like the rainforest or just kind of in like, more tropical conditions, so I need to do a little bit more research there to see what this plant would truly enjoy, but it seems to be enjoying being rather close to my south-facing window, but I'm sure if I put this plant in the window, it would likely burn, so I'm not going to do that. One last thing about this plant that you might notice is the little bit of sap that's on the petioles of the leaves. I believe this is sugar coming out from the extrafloral nectaries in the plant, which is just something that some philodendrons have. In this case, it's on the petiole here, but it's something that I haven't noticed to be harmful to the plant at all. Like, I don't think it's attracting pests by any means. Let me know in the comments. It's not something I'm too sure about, but honestly, the only thing it does is catch cat hair here in my home. So I do every now and again give it a good rinse down just to kind of clean it off and make it look a little bit more presentable to myself. But other than that, there's nothing else really to say about this plant. Other than that, it's just such a really fun, interesting plant to grow, and that I just love that it's native a little bit closer to home. Next, we're going to talk about Philodendron Florida, which is a really lovely hybrid of philodendron. This, I believe the parents of this plant are Philodendron squamiferum, which is the red bristle philodendron, as well as Philodendron laciniatum, which is a philodendron. How many times can I say philodendron? It's a philodendron that has some really exaggerated leaf shape and structure compared to this plant right here. It's really lovely and beautiful. But this one, as I mentioned, has the red bristle philodendron as the parent, so that kind of explains where it gets these rough, red, slightly red, not entirely red, but on this one it's just slightly red petiole, and it's just a really lovely plant. I really enjoy the leaf shape, and I really enjoy the way that the petioles are. I think it's really cool. This, I haven't had it that long. I've only been growing this one since the summertime. I actually got it as one long vine, and I actually cut it into 3 pieces, and these are the bottom 2 pieces. I actually gave the top piece to my friend Linda, but this has some very promising new growth, so I'm very looking forward to it. I can tell that come spring and summertime, this plant is going to go absolutely wild for me this year, or at least I hope it does. But this has been very easygoing. Of course, I can't speak for it on terms of true experience because I've only really cared for it. I really haven't had it grow for me. But this one lives a few feet away from my south-facing windows, kind of up against the wall. It's actually on a macrame wall hanger, and I think that's a really fun way to display this plant because I really like how it just kind of like shows off the leaves as they kind of just hang off the wall, and I'm really looking forward to how this plant kind of trails and vines come spring and summer, and how it's going to look hanging on the wall. So I'm really interested in that. But this leaf shape is just something I'm absolutely obsessed with right now. There are many other philodendrons with this lovely leaf shape, but this is just one of the ones that stands out to me in my home. It's just like such an incredible plant with just such an incredible leaf shape, and the added benefit of these rough red stems I just think is really interesting as well. So if you have any care tips for Philodendron Florida, I would love to hear. As I said, I've only been growing this one for not entirely that long, but I can tell that this is a very sturdy plant to grow in the home. So of course I had to share it with you guys today. Another philodendron that definitely deserves some more attention is Philodendron atabapoense, definitely a mouthful. This is a really lovely leaf-shaped philodendron. You can see right here with this very mature leaf how lovely these leaves are. And my favorite thing about this plant is, of course, the shade of purple that hides on the back of these leaves. So that's definitely why I gave this plant a dark red pot to kind of play off of that. But it's just such a lovely plant. This leaf shape is to die for. Of course, I really love those winged and lobed leaves, but this is just something that's really nice. It's a lot like the very expensive Philodendron Spiritus Sancti. That is something that you'll probably see as like the holy grail unicorn plant in people's collections if they are just so lucky enough to have it, or if they have enough money to pay for it. But this is a really lovely philodendron that definitely costs a fraction. A fraction isn't saying the least of it. It definitely costs a percentage, a very small percentage of the price of a Philodendron Spiritus Sancti. So this is a really lovely alternative per se if you're looking for that similar leaf shape in your home. This is just a really lovely plant. This has been a really easy grower for me. I've only had this one as well for honestly probably not even as long as the Philodendron Florida, but this one has grown pretty well for me. It's put off 3 leaves since I brought it home, one of them being this one right here. But of course I have this more mature leaf from the main cutting of the plant that is in all of its glory and going to look hopefully wonderful for a very long time because I really enjoy this. But this is a plant that, very similar to the last 2 philodendrons that I shared, is going to grow in a vining manner. So if I were to give this one a moss pole, I'm sure it would really appreciate it, and it would definitely encourage the leaves to grow larger in stature. But I think I kind of just want this one in particular kind of vine all over the place. I think with this leaf shape, that's something I would really like to see it, perhaps putting it up on a shelf and then having it kind of trail down with these lovely spade-shaped leaves or lanceolate leaves, and seeing the purple undersides from beneath. I just think that sounds very lovely. This one has been very easygoing as far as watering goes. I do have it in a ceramic planter, so I don't water as often as, say, as the Philodendron mexicanum that was in the terracotta planter. But I do think I'm watering this one probably like every week to maybe say every like 10 days. I don't think I'm pushing it every 2 weeks, but I do have it in a very porous mixture. A lot of perlite and some orchid bark, so it definitely helps keep this philodendron on the drier side, which is something that I do want to keep in mind when I am planting in such a thick ceramic pot, because this is going to hold on to moisture if I'm using a much denser peaty mixture. So just something to keep in mind. But a really fun philodendron. If you can find this one in a small size for a good price, I highly recommend picking it up. This, out of all the philodendrons I talked about today, is probably the one that would cost the most, but if you do a little bit of digging, you could certainly find a small size plant for a really good price. So if you're looking for a fun, long, lanceolate-shaped, leaf-shaped philodendron, I highly recommend trying out Philodendron atabapoense. Next up is the wonderful Philodendron Tripartitum, and this is a philodendron that I definitely didn't appreciate as much until I actually brought it into my home. I am adoring the 3 parts of the leaf. That's actually exactly what the name is suggesting in Latin, tripartitum, that it has 3 parted leaves, so you can see the way it's shaped. It's so wonderful. It's a little bit different than some of the other philodendrons I typically see, and so for that reason I've really been drawn towards it. And it's also one that I just really think would look great just kind of going wily all over the place. I think it's just such this different leaf shape would just really stand out amongst the rest. It's been very easy going for me. I've only had this one since the spring or summertime, and it has put off probably 4 or 5 leaves for me from what I'm seeing. I will point out though, I might appreciate more of a moss pole setting compared to some of the other ones that I've been growing, from the way that it's kind of losing these back lobes, which I am so fond of. So come spring and summertime, if it doesn't start to put off some of those more developed leaves, I'll probably consider cutting it back, which I also have this like nub of new growth right here, which I'm sure would spring to life if I cut this plant back, so I wouldn't do any harm there. But a really fun plant that I just don't see very often at all. I honestly really don't see this plant ever, but it's such a fun philodendron. It's very much more like a woodlandy philodendron compared to a tropical one, so I really appreciate that look. If you follow me here on YouTube, you've probably heard me say at some point that I appreciate like the more like northeastern plants compared to the tropical plants. It's just more my vibe, and this philodendron definitely checks that mark for me. So a really fun philodendron that's definitely different from the other ones and is so far for me a very easy grower. Lastly, I want to talk about the Philodendron White Princess, which I would consider to be an excellent alternative for the Philodendron Pink Princess or the Philodendron White Knight if you've been looking for either of those, but you've also been wanting to maybe try a more inexpensive alternative. So this is a more miniature version of those plants, so it's not going to be as large in stature, which is maybe why it is a little bit more inexpensive. But these leaves are beautiful. It gets these really gorgeous variegated leaves. I'm surprised, honestly, that this plant doesn't cost more than what I've seen from how beautiful these leaves are. If you look at my plant, you're going to see a little bit of brown damage. This is actually from sitting a little bit too close to the grow light, so I have since moved it, but I've gotten some really lovely growth out of this plant. I've once again only been growing this one for a few months. I usually like to talk about plants I've been growing for a much longer period of time, but all these plants I've been growing today, I feel very confident that they would also grow well for you because they've been growing very well for me. This one, I believe all of the leaves on this plant are actually new right here since I brought it home, and you can see a new one that's about to unfurl right here. But this plant has just been such an easy going philodendron. I don't know too much about the origin of this plant, so it's definitely a cultivated variety from the look of it, hopefully with good intent, but it's just such a beautiful plant. I love the strawberries and cream look that it gets to it. It's been very good to me. We'll see what happens in the upcoming years, but it's been a very fun to grow plant. It's very out there. It's not one I see talked about very often. Everybody wants the Pink Princess and the White Knight philodendrons, but nobody's talking about the Philodendron White Princess, and maybe there's a reason behind that that I'm unaware of, but I just think this plant is so darling. I think it's adorable in my little locally made, handmade pot. It's just adorable, and it's been very easy growing, so I highly recommend it if you stumble across this, or if you're looking for something of this nature and you don't want to pay a hefty price. Definitely look out for the Philodendron White Princess. Alrighty, that's going to about do it for today's video on 5 interesting out there philodendrons. Just to recap, the 5 I talked about were Philodendron mexicanum, Philodendron Florida, Philodendron atabapoense, Philodendron Tripartitum, and Philodendron White Princess. And of course, I will leave all of this in the description below in case you want to do some research on your own time. Thank you so much for joining me. If you have any other philodendrons that you would recommend, please let me know in the comments. I would really love to hear. Otherwise, thank you again for watching. If you don't already, follow me on Instagram at phillyfoliage, subscribe to my channel, and I will see you guys in my next video. Have a great day!